arm and forearm, we want to make really sure what moves what, all right? But in general, muscles of the anterior arm, right, and forearm are all flexors. And muscles on the back are going to be extensors, right? So let's start with shoulder and then just work our way down. So for the shoulder, we have our subscapularis muscle, and that subscapular fossa. And then on the posterior side, so you know it's the posterior side when you see the scapular spine, right? So we're going to take the deltoid off. So the deltoid is this nice big muscle. Again, has a really wide origin. So it has anterior fibers that flex the arm, these lateral fibers that abduct the arm, the posterior fibers that extend the arm, and then it rotates the arm medially and laterally. So this muscle does almost everything except for bring it back in, adduct the arm. Does not adduct. So there, and then we have our supraspinatus, right? So we're locating the spine, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and then we have two little teres muscles. Teres minor is on top, and teres major is on the bottom. To that. So those are the arm. Oh, and there's another thing, the rotator cuff. So the rotator cuff are a group of muscles that originate on the shoulder, and they attach to around the head of the humerus, and they're just the tendons of it stabilize the head of the humerus, because again, remember that shoulder joint is very, very wiggly. It's not a very stable joint. So in order to stabilize it, we have muscle tendons to help. The four muscles that make the rotator cuff, CUFF, are the subscapularis, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and then the teres minor. Okay, the teres major doesn't come up high enough to be part of it. So it's these three muscles plus this one form the rotator cuff. All right, so moving on to here. So the arm muscles on the anterior side, there's two. There's the biceps brachii, which is this guy here. Remember, the biceps means two heads. So the biceps, this is the lateral head. It is lateral, but it's called long. So I like to think about the two L's. My lateral head is the long head, the other side is the short head, and then the insertion is the same place. But this is biceps brachii. Biceps is one of those muscles that crosses two joints. So it does cross the shoulder and also the elbow. So it's going to flex the shoulder a little bit, but really flex the elbow. When we take off your biceps brachii, we have a brachialis muscle. So this muscle starts right here on the humerus, goes over the elbow joint, so it only has action on the elbow joint. One thing I mentioned in the lecture is that this muscle, because it inserts onto the radius, remember the radius is the one with that round head, and then when you supinate and pronate, it's the radius that spins. So muscles that help you supinate and pronate will always have to insert onto the radius. Not that you need to know that, but it's just good. It's good to know. So this muscle, the biceps brachii, will also help supinate. So it's if you see people lift weights at the gym, sometimes you'll see them start in this pronated position. They'll curve up and then like this. So those are the full actions of biceps brachii. So it is a supinate, which is palm up, and then flex. Yeah. All right. So those are our muscles. The brachialis does not supinate or pronate. And on the back of the arm, we have one muscle, and it's the triceps brachii. So there's three heads. That one that's more lateral is literally called the lateral head. This one is the medial head. So the medial head's kind of hard to see. It's a really thin muscle, and it kind of looks like it's scooting underneath this one. That's medial head, lateral head, and then in between you have a really big long head. Okay, so lateral, medial, and long head. All of them will come and insert on basically your elbow bone, which is your olecranon of the ulna. And then it's to extend your forearm, right? So it works at the elbow, extending your forearm. So you can say extend the elbow or extend the forearm, both are fine, okay? So that's your triceps brachii. Now the fun begins. So remember we said on the anterior side of our forearm, we have all flexors. The forearm muscles are going to go over the wrist, and some of them will insert onto the carpals or metacarpals. And so if you do that, you're only going to flex the wrist. Some of these will go into the fingers and you can flex the fingers, okay? But anyway, we're moving in like this. So the first 4, this guy keeps falling off. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are your PF muscles. So this little guy here is your pronator teres. F, flexor carpi radialis. P, palmaris longus. F, flexor carpi ulnaris. We're on the pinky side, right? So PF muscles are your most superficial, and they're all going to, so pronator teres tells you what it does, it pronates. Flexor carpi radialis also tells you what it does. It flexes the wrist. The carpi means wrist, right? So flexor carpi radialis goes so far as here, metacarpals, and it flexes the wrist. But since it's on the thumb side, it can also, when it contracts, it moves your hand towards the thumb. So in anatomical position, that would be an abduction, all right? So that's flex and abduct your hand. This one, palmaris longus, insert, so this is another thing. The palmaris longus muscle, the tendon goes over your carpal tunnel. So this little guy here, this white piece that goes across, is called the flexor retinaculum. And all of the tendons in your forearm go underneath that, in that tunnel, which we call the carpal tunnel, and it helps to move the fingers. The only muscle that doesn't is your palmaris longus. So you can kind of see the tendon on top. And then what this does is it expands into a connective tissue in the palm called the palmar aponeurosis. So those are in your notes. And then the other one here is your flexor carpi ulnaris. Again, it tells you that it flexes the wrist, and since it's on the pinky side, it'll also adduct your hand, right? So flex and adduct. When we take this off, the PF muscles off, actually, let's keep it on. In between your PF muscles, there's this one you can see here. That's an intermediate group. So there's actually 3 layers here. The second layer down, this is called flexor digitorum superficialis, which is a mouthful. But flexor digitorum tells you it flexes the digits. Any muscle with digitorum in the name flexes digits 2 through 5. The only muscles that like move the thumb will have the word pollicis in it. Pollicis meaning that pollex, right, the thumb. Okay, so when we take this off, what we can see is the flexor digitorum superficialis also came off, or you can see a little piece of it right here. And so we cut away that flexor digitorum superficialis, and we can see 1, 2, 3 muscles deep, deep, deep. So this is your flexor digitorum profundus that flexes the digits 2 through 5. This is your flexor pollicis longus. And this one in the corner here, this is your pronator quadratus. So it's basically just a little transversely oriented muscle across the wrist, and it pronates, okay? The trick for these two, so the flexor digitorum superficialis and profundus, flex the digits, but this one, the superficialis, flexes the middle phalanx, and the profundus goes all the way to the distal phalanx, which is part of the actions you need to know. So they both flex your fingers, but the one that's superficial will flex this bone, and then the one that's deeper will flex this one. So that's your anterior forearm. So all flexors. And now we move to the back. All right. So we left our PF muscles, and now what we see is there's a lot on the back. So I like to just learn this from thumb to pinky. So this is going to be a muscle called brachioradialis. This is a muscle that is going to be the one that's between the flexors and the back of the hand, the extensors. So brachioradialis is going to, like when you're shaking someone's hand, if you look at my arm, if you shake someone's hand, or if you can kind of see mine go up, right? So if I'm resisting my pushing down, you can see how laterally that muscle is. So it's this action here, it's flexing your forearm, but kind of in that middle prone position, so you're shaking someone's hand. That's that guy. Then you get into all these nitty gritty ones. So just like on the front, we have extensor carpi radialis. Just like on the back, on the front we had flexor carpi radialis. On the back we have extensor carpi radialis, except there's two of them. This is longus and this is brevis, okay? So extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, so short and long. They will also extend, right? So extend the wrist, extensor carpi radialis. So because it's also on the radial side, it'll do the same thing. It'll abduct your wrist. All right, so after those two, then we have this one that goes straight up and down, and that's extensor digitorum. So again, digitorum means digits 2 through 5, so it extends those digits 2 through 5. Then this little guy here is almost part of extensor digitorum. It's extensor digiti minimi. So digiti minimi is your pinky, and that's what it does. It just goes to the pinky, digit 5. Then we're on the other side now. We're on the pinky side. Extensor, carpi ulnaris. Okay, so just like the other side, we had a flexor carpi ulnaris. On the back, we have extensor carpi ulnaris. Same action, extend the wrist, and then adduct the wrist. Lastly, we have a little guy here. This is called anconeus, A-N-C-O-N-E-U-S. This and triceps work together to do the same thing. They extend the elbow. So this little guy, even though it's located kind of further down, but it does extend the elbow. All right, so deeper, we come out of this, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 muscles down here. The really big one is supinator. Easy action, supinates the forearm. Then you have A-E-E-E, like you're screaming, "Ay," or whatever. It says this is an abductor. These are all gonna be for the thumb. Abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, extensor pollicis longus, and extensor indicis. So abductor, extensor, extensor, extensor. These are both for the thumb. This one is indicis, which is your index finger. So it doesn't look like a separate muscle, but that last little number there, that would be extensor indicis. So it's S-A-E-E-E, okay? And that is, lastly, there's a group of muscles that form the anatomical snuff box, and those are all the pollicis muscles. So 1, 2, 3, those three form the anatomical snuff box, which is, if you do this, right, there's that indent right there, that's the snuff box. And so I guess people used to put powder there and sniff it, and that's your your go-to area to put that stuff. Anyways, but that's those 3 muscles there, the tendons. And that's the whole thing. So we have only 3 muscles in the arm. We only have biceps, brachii, brachialis, and then triceps brachii. Why are there only 3? And then here there's like a count list, right? There's so many in the forearm. So if you think about your arm moves your forearm. So when you're pushing or pulling or things like that, you require a lot of strength, right? You don't have like very small movements that your forearm does. So these muscles are built for strength. And when you come down here, there's all these tiny little muscles that have like, their individual actions. That's for dexterity, because your hands, you need a lot of like fine movement, fine control. So a lot of muscles in the forearm coming into the hand, so you can have like that fine control in the hand. So we'd say these muscles are built for dexterity, right? To be dexterous, and then this is built for strength. Yeah. I think that's my